Welcome everyone to the second installment, the sequel of our webinar series, Partnering for the Future of Middle School Math. My name is Jennifer Hamilton. I'm the Senior Vice President here at NORC at the University of Chicago, and I'm the head of the Education and Child Development Division, which is quite a mouthful. I'll be your moderator today. We'll be having a very interesting discussion on the future of math education, innovations in EdTech. So first off, thank you everybody for tuning in. Here at NORC, we are deeply invested in the research that drives educational improvement. And as a statistician myself, math education is a topic that is particularly close to my heart. So with that said, we're going to start with introductions. We have a particularly amazing panel today. Let's begin with you, Steve. If you can introduce yourself and then popcorn it over to the next person.
Sure. Hi, I'm Steve Ritter. I am founder and chief scientist at Carnegie Learning. My background is in cognitive psychology, which is really the origin of our company, is in thinking about and modeling how students learn, particularly in mathematics, and then embedding those models in AI systems that provide students with individualized feedback and pathways to learning. So very excited to be here. And I'll pass it to John.
Thanks, Steve. I am John Whitmer, have a strikingly similar title as founder and senior research scientist for a company called Learning Data Insights. We're a technical assistance provider working on providing learning analytics support for early evidence of learning gains and validity around through AI-enabled EdTech products and platforms, as well as open science services. My background is in doing education data science. Both began doing that in the California State University and community college systems, and then went to provide that for the people creating solutions, worked for Blackboard, now Anthology, as well as ACT, before moving into the Department of Education, and now work for a variety of collaboratories doing these kind of services. And so I will pass it to Carla.
Hi. Thanks, John. I'm Carla Zummak-Frederick. I am the Chief Product Officer of Teaching and Learning at Infinite Campus. And I'm excited to be here today. I have 3 young kids, and watching them grow is very fun and interesting. They have lots of differences in the way they learn, and I think teachers get to deal with a lot more than 3 kids at a time when they're doing things like this. So their job is very important and difficult, and it's exciting to be part of something that's talking about building tools that are going to help teachers and administrators do things for students. So yeah, I'm happy to be here, and yeah, my background is in computer science and being a software engineer, and then moving to management, and now I'm the Chief Product Officer of Teaching and Learning.
Carla, and I have a child who is just finishing up 8th grade, so middle school math is like very front and center for me.
Yes.
Like I mentioned earlier, we also have a special guest star today, and one of my very favorite people of all time, Dan Jarrett. He's going to give you some of his thoughtful insights towards the end. And, no pressure there, Dan. But if you would like to introduce yourself now, then we can get going.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I appreciate the kind words. And yes, my daughter is also almost in 7th grade. This is a very meaningful time for us too. So I'm Dan Jarrett. I build programs and infrastructure for large-scale social science and data science, especially in education. I founded and led Infinite Campus's Academic Industry Partnership Program, which is a member of this consortium. I was a leader at Safe Insights, which is the largest education grant the National Science Foundation has awarded. I'm helping Clever, which is a large single sign-on and rostering platform, expand their data model to better support research. And most recently, I was Chief Technical and Innovation Officer at the Learning Engineering Virtual Institute, which is a $100 million philanthropically supported program to improve middle school math outcomes. So what really excites me the most about this project are new capacities for rigorous evidence generation in education, but which leverage systems that schools are already using so that we can reduce the friction and the cost of good education research. Back to you, Jen.
Very nicely said. We have a lot to cover in not a lot of time, so I'm going to jump right now into our very first question for the panel. and that is, how is your organization currently focused on developing AI educational tools or facilitating the use of AI in teaching and learning? Let's see. So we have Steve. You want to go first on this one?
Sure, be happy to. So Carnegie Learning is an interesting story with respect to AI because, as I mentioned, our origins are in cognitive modeling, understanding how students think and embedding those models in software that guides instruction. That's what we sometimes refer to as good old-fashioned AI now. It is a form of AI. Symbolic AI that personalizes instruction for students. And so we continue to do that. But I think mostly people are focused now on the kind of revolution introduced by generative AI. And when we think about generative AI, I think of our activities in two broad areas. One is content, which is focused on motivation. So I mentioned my background is in cognitive psychology. Mostly historically, I've thought about like how people think, how students think and learn. But motivation is equally important. And one of the things that AI allows us to do is to create mathematics content that students can relate to better and thus learn better from it. At least we hope so. Second area is more instructional, related to feedback, and that's I think we're particularly excited about multimodal feedback. So Mathia, our kind of traditional, like I said, symbolic AI tool, is built around giving students individualized feedback based on the correct answers that they're giving, the mistakes that they make, and the hints that they ask for. We looked at data from Mathia last year. We gave 3.1 million unique hints to students. But all those hints and feedback messages, all those messages were text because that's what's easy to generate or capable to generate with more traditional technologies. And now we're thinking, well, sometimes the right kind of feedback might be a video, it might be an animation, it might be a diagram, but all, again, personalized, right? When you give a student a diagram, you want to show them like, here's what you did, here's what you should have done. So visually, so personalized to the way they're thinking. So that's those are two big areas that we've been focusing on.
That's really cool. I'll go next if that's all right. I can talk about what we're doing for AI at Infinite Campus. And I think most people, when they think of Infinite Campus, think about a student information system, but we're actually a lot more than that. Like I said, I'm the Chief Product Officer of Teaching and Learning, and we are building the learning management system. And the learning management system, we're built really alongside the student information system, so it's really effectively one product. And we have sort of two things too. In the short term, the focus is really around integrations with learning partners like Carnegie Learning, because they're doing AI really, really well right now. They're doing extraordinary things. And we don't want to compete with them because we're not doing that kind of work. We're a software company that's not in content and that kind of stuff. But we want to partner with them. So we're working really hard on doing integrations that partner with some of the people that are more on the content side and doing those pieces that are really much more advanced in AI right now. But to integrate successfully and sustainably and to do it at scale, it's really important that we follow standards in doing that. Because if you don't follow standards, you have to do it uniquely for every partner that you have. So it's very important that we support those standards and really push those organizations forward as well. In the long term, however, we are working towards something called Agile Learning. And with Agile Learning, we'll be using AI to schedule students into small groups. And then we're going to build a recommendation engine that will match those specific groups with content from the learning partners that have been proven to be effective. So like all other AI tools, we believe this is going to be transformative, especially within the classroom.
So maybe I'd jump in there with as well. Thanks, Carla and Steve. Some of the work that we're doing is, I think, on kind of two areas. One of them is, I think, really oriented on kind of elevating and amplifying effective practices. So I was just on a phone call with Steve Fanksali, who is works with Carnegie Learning yesterday, talking about Director of Data Science, talking about a presentation we'll be making at an upcoming Ames convening event to talk about the ways that they've been looking at the evidence generated through platforms and through the results they see of some of the ways students react and respond to those 3.1 million text messages, not that in particular, the hints that they receive. How do students use them? What do they do with them? What happens afterwards? Some of that. So elevating some of the work that's done around that. And then more broadly, thinking, how do we know, I think to Carla's, the question you just raised, or the point you just raised, what does transformative mean for the students? And how do we know if we've achieved it? And then, the tricky point there then becomes both in what do we know, especially in these contexts with the new AI, when you can't always anticipate to make materials motivational and meaningful to students. You often have use cases that you didn't anticipate in design. So how do you evaluate that and then do that in a way that can help demonstrate how well this is working or whether it's not working? And I think, we'll talk. I know there's a later question about the future of research, but this kind of early evidence generation, early usage, doing that, I think in a more robust way than is often done, is something, again, we're trying to both to demonstrate and create, I think, some, if not standardized approaches, at least some common methods and models around how we can look at these technologies, because there's a big thread going on, it seems like, in both LinkedIn as well as on a couple lists that I'm on right now that are bemoaning the state of RCTs that are done on generative AI. And I think there's really good work being done around research and figuring out how to both organize that and to put that together so that our stakeholders and parents can feel a little more confidence about the tools that are being used in classrooms.
Mm. And I think that's great. So we had, in terms of AI, kind of the instructional content, the agile learning and the LMS and student information system point of view, as well as, John, your kind of amplifying and asking the question, like, how do we know we're doing a good job at this, right? And I think that brings us into our second question very nicely, which is how might advancements in education technology affects student math achievement? And obviously, motivation is on the way to achievement as well. So let's see, who would like to start this one? Maybe John?
Sure. Well, I feel like that's a fun part of being in a session like this. I'll echo, I think, what you just said, what Steve said. To me, what I've seen in some of the more exciting projects, I mean, really, that it gets back at educational cognitive psychology and theory, is that we want to think about what motivates and engages students, and moving beyond kind of a skill and drill types of approaches, philosophies and ideas and pedagogies that are not new, but I think we can achieve in very different ways. We talked about our families. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She was learning angles, and I asked Conmigo, what are the different types of angles? And then I just thought, as an offside, and I like ice cream, right? And Conmigo came back and said, well, isosceles triangles are shaped like an ice cream cone. And she does like ice cream, and she thought that was cute. And I've remembered it since that time, a year and a half ago. And I think these kind of engaging experiences we can create in considering motivation for students, there's also this, like, I think that we can create experiences that are not just inspirational, they're connected, is one form of motivation and incentivization. The other part is much harder, right? We know that learning is not always easy, and the thinking about this kind of zone of, like, productive persistence when students struggle, figuring out how we can have solutions that can lead students there without going off the cliff when they kind of lose engagement. I'm reading a number of people proposing projects that are thinking about this broader model of who a student is, what their capabilities are, what their interests are. And I think thinking about both, it's kind of strange to think technologies who know our kids, that feels a little off-putting to me, but to some degree, it can do that at a scale that, goes beyond a couple of kids in a classroom, and I think can really begin to give these more impactful learning experiences to students.
Yeah, I'll just follow up. I think I would totally agree with this emphasis on student motivation. And I think one of the things in the background that I'm always thinking about is not only how AI changes the instructional experience, but how AI is changing the world that students are growing up in outside of school, and how that makes us think differently about how to motivate students and how to explain to them the value of what they're learning in school. Because after all, you've got this AI tool that can solve your equations for you and do a lot of the math that you could do. But if you're letting the AI tool do it, you're not learning yourself. And so one of the things we've been focusing on is fostering a sense of belonging, a sense in students that they belong in school, that it's valuable to them, that it's something that they care about. And one area I'll talk about, like sort of an amazing experience we had about a month ago. We went out to a school. We were testing a tool that we built, which is a generative AI tool that allows students to write their own word problems, or at least it kind of quizzes them about contexts and then writes a word problem in a known mathematics domain, a problem that in fact we can help them solve with our Mathia software. And it's sort of, just prompting them for what are you interested in, or what do you want the problem to be about, food, sports, music, other topics like that. And what really struck me was we did this as a group exercise, kind of 100 middle schoolers at an assembly, all doing this together and calling out like what we wanted to tell the AI to write the problem about. And parts of it are multiple choice. So they said, we want to do problems about food. Turns out, universally, kids love doing math about food. And two of the foods that came up, one of the first food that came up as a choice was poi, which is unusual food. If people don't know, poi is a Hawaiian kind of mashed taro root. And one of the kids in the audience, this was not in Hawaii, was like, "Oh, my family's Hawaiian. I love poi. We have that all the time." Right. And then the next food was fufu, which I hadn't even heard of, but fufu is a similar mashed root food that's African. And another kid was like, "Oh, yeah, we have fufu all the time. It's great." Right. And if you imagine these kids going, like, when have they ever seen something sort of so specific from their culture come up in a sort of established curriculum? It's just impossible to think of that happening without technology and particularly without AI that's able to kind of embed that into a program instruction and make the students kind of feel seen in a way that they don't otherwise. So that's really gotten us thinking about like the value of this kind of personalization in a way that's not strictly about they understand the math through the problem better. It's also about them believing that, this experience is relevant to them. The technology is relating to them in a way that's deeper than it can before.
I'm just going to chime in for one second here. I'll be quick, but both of those responses made me think about how computers are good at certain things and people are good at certain things, and it's when we leverage the machines to do the things that they're good at, and we leverage the people to do the things that they're good at, that we have a really, really positive output. And I feel like both of these answers kind of reflected that, where if we let the computer do what the computer does really, really well, it can really, really help us. But teachers are still very, very important in that whole equation. So.
Absolutely. And Carla, I was trying to think of something smart to say to sum up this question, and you just did it for me. So better than I could have ever. So thank you so much for that. Now we're going to move on to our third question. And as a evaluation methodologist, I can't help but get excited about this. What is your perspective on the role of research and evaluation in education technology? Let's see, Carla, you're on a roll. Why don't you start with this one?
All right. Well, research and evaluation are extremely important. And I think working with districts, so they're part of that research and evaluation, is also very important. But I also think about how there's a limited amount of money in school budgets, and how it needs to be spent responsibly. Educators should have access to the information and the data and everything that can prove or disprove that the products, the software, the content, the tools they're using and they're purchasing are worth the cost, since budgets are such an important part of the school system. Oftentimes, schools also have to commit to something. They're gonna buy this software, and it's multiple years that they're committing to when they do something like that. So I think that impact extends multiple years and many students. And so having good research and fair evaluation means that those districts can make really good decisions that's based on, like evaluation and research and things that we can trust, as opposed to, potentially the spin that the marketing team or something is putting on it.
Yeah, maybe I jump in next to say, I mean, I think that especially in the case of generative AI, there's an increased need for research, and not necessarily, again, RCTs and other large scale outcome measures are critical and very important, especially as Carla mentioned, right? You're thinking multi-year large commitments of people's time and opportunity costs potentially compared to these solutions. But with generative AI, I mean, we all know and have experienced, right? Hallucinations. I mean, I guess they're both a feature and a bug, but they're definitely, right, something you need to be aware of. And I know, Steve, you showed me solutions or, innovative things you're developing, and you're like, I'm not sure what's going to come out right now on things you're not deployed that are in an R&D kind of phase. You all are very careful about that. But like some of this, we really don't know yet what some of those results will be. And so I think this is an area in which there's a huge need to make sure that the solutions will perform as expected, that we have, both appropriate guardrails, but also there's validity, reliability, right? Fairness has been evaluated on the solutions that are being put out there, because we know, I mean, we also, right, the data that these systems are usually trained on, or at least the base foundation models, do not include data that's representative of the students we seek to serve, sometimes by intent and sometimes legally required to not include that. So I think that's something where I think it's very important. And I guess I'm biased here, or reveal I'm always been more interested in the early stage evidence, and not kind of having this magic box in the middle where students come in and then magic things come out. And Carla, to your point, that always feels like a little bit like marketing, because, right, we know it's not, right, whether you have a treadmill in your house or you have access to a gym, right, it's the ways in which you use that kind of those tools, these applications. And I think the same way where research tools are not effective in all contexts and all deployments, right? It depends on how people are using and deploying them. And so I think that way, I do hope that both we could give tips and tools to institutions, and that they would be able to use those to see ways in which they could use these effectively, and then make the additional investments necessary. So some of the outcomes-based contracting work I've been excited about, because it puts everyone's kind of, I don't know, has a little bit of skin in the game for students to get those outcomes and make sure that we get the implementation on schools that's more than just licensing a product. Again, that's really necessary, but we need the other part as well. So I think that's where we can bring research to show both what the product can do, but also what we need to see from what schools need to do, or should do, or could do, or where we've seen more effective practices coming out. So I think there's a couple levels there. And I guess that all that said is I hope that will increase the usage and adoption of tools that are more research based. Again, we have the, stellar folks in the room doing that work, but when you go, there is a lot of other solutions being provided, startups that don't have the funding, that don't have the means and aren't investing in research. And I think that's a bit of a buyer beware, right? If you're going to go out to eat and buy something and, you don't have an FDA stamp of approval, or you're going to on something like, to be aware of that. Again, not to say it's necessarily bad or you shouldn't try something new, and that everyone must do certain types of research. But I think there's a level of kind of responsibility to be able to describe what has been conducted and what people can kind of meaningfully use these solutions for responsibly. Keep on thinking of that word, but when you would want to try that and who you would try those solutions on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just say like I love the emphasis on experimentation within educational technology because it is controllable to some extent. But on the other hand, there's a tendency to think that because AI is smart, that there's almost nothing to be done, right? If we got rid of the hallucinations, everything would be fine. But I think of the analogy of, the best mathematicians are not necessarily the best mathematics teachers. And in the same way, these kind of generative AI models understand mathematics, but don't necessarily understand how to relate to how students are thinking about mathematics, which is really what we need in education. And so there's a lot of work to be done to sort of train those models to better relate to students than they currently do.
Yeah, and I think that school districts having to make, high stakes investments with not a lot of funding, really looking to research to kind of guide them in these kinds of decisions, which I think kind of leads us nicely into our very last question. When you consider the future of education technology and its ability to advance student success in math, what are you most excited about? What may be possible in the near future? Who would like to start us off on this one? Maybe Steve?
Sure. Be happy to. Yeah, so I'd emphasize again this sort of motivational element, and particularly in the context of students understanding that the AI tools that are out there are really smart and could do the work for them. And so at some level, like our challenge is that we have to think differently about how to motivate students and present to students the goal of education in the first place, right? That the AI can solve problems for them. So what role do they play in the process of solving these problems? And what it's really about is understanding that our goal as educators is to make students want to solve problems, to understand the value of going through the process. It's most of what you do in school, like the world doesn't need this equation to be solved. What the world needs is for you to solve the equation so that you're building your own internal capacity, insight, and ability so that you understand mathematics more deeply, right? And that's what you bring out into the world. And that's, we don't talk about that enough or think about like how to present that perspective to students, which is really the essence of motivation, right? Why am I doing this? When am I ever going to use this, right? And the answer is, well, it's not that you're doing this, it's that you're building this deeper understanding because then you'll go out and understand your world better. And I think generative AI has great potential for helping give that message, but not on its own, right? The other part of this is always thinking about like, how is AI a partner with a teacher in the classroom who helps motivate students in that way and not a replacement?
Well, that was beautifully said. And John, you look like you were going to jump in here.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I think in two ways. I mean, one, I think that we've heard, and again, the people that I'm most excited about and the solutions I'm seeing consider just as Steve said, right? It's not a human in the loop. It's AI as a partner, AI as a supporter to what we believe to be effective teaching practices and what we know about students. So there's often a broader discourse about AI replacing teachers or AI taking over solutions, AI replacing cognitive, but that's if you're designing these solutions the wrong way. If you're taking saying I'm going to just use AI to answer all my math questions or something like that. Instead, the idea is to create more interest, excitement, motivation around students. And I think the place where it's uniquely able to do that is that we can address the variety and differences of students in classrooms, and it can do it in a pretty cheeky and engaging way, right? Bringing up boy, you can bring up, I don't know how many, Taylor Swift, examples have been created, but I'm sure the number is very high, right? And, there's probably a different kind of a metaphor for other students in ways that we couldn't create in the decision support systems and constrained environments that we used in the past. I think there's ways that we're all surprised in using this technology that it comes up with. And I think that it's also that's an edgy area, right? Where we can't always validate or test in advance. And that, some of the solutions I've seen, and when we're using AI in solutions like AI disclosure right up front to say, this solution, use the help of AI. Actually, my daughter was just doing it last night for a book report, and she was looking at a solution and it said it was a summarization was AI generated. And she's like, can I use it or not? And I was like, well, that's a good question. Are you allowed to use it? Are you not? How much should you trust it? Right? That becomes a conversation rather than like, is this a right or wrong answer? Right? I think that gets it like, well, should you trust it? Why do you think that's, something you could or couldn't trust? And that opening up of education, what does it mean to have knowledge, in a way that generates curiosity, generates interest, and is not about solving a problem or in itself isn't the goal. The goal is to kind of excite students, generate their interest, identify where their strengths are. And again, I think that's where you obviously need humans, because the robots don't care. I think back to Carla's point, they don't care what they feed you or what you're good at. It just has to be plausible, right? I think humans saying, "Oh, that's really good. Emphasize this more. De-emphasize, this other area, and definitely don't talk about, there are certain things that we think are off limits." I think being able to do that in new and creative ways makes me really excited. And I'll say, right, also to do that, talking about families, but I am more interested in the kids that don't have these solutions at home, and frequently kids from under-resourced, impoverished environments, right, who might not have that kind of exposure. I think we have the opportunity to serve those students in ways we didn't before. Lots of barriers persist and are very important that we continue to address, that AI won't address and resolve. But I think we can better serve those students with these solutions than we could before. Again, with the right research and supports in place.
I'm going to take a step back a little bit from sort of the exciting world of AI and sort of the cutting edge pieces, and even think about EdTech in a more general way of just simplifying things and making it easier and providing more opportunities. So AI clearly is presenting, more options and more things. But I'll give an example of when I was growing up. I grew up in a small town, and there weren't any options really for what classes I could take. There are so many students and just so many teachers and just so many courses and options. And today within Infinite Campus, it's possible for a school to offer courses to students that are not enrolled in that school. So let's say your school has a CTE program that's about nursing or auto body repair, and you've got this great shop that you can do all these things in, and your neighboring districts don't have that. You can open that up to other schools in the area and say, come register for this course, and it will automatically enroll them. It'll automatically take the attendance and deal with the scheduling and sync up the parent and student apps, and all that stuff is done through EdTech. This stuff used to be able to be done, but it was very manual, and it was very labor intensive, and technology and EdTech allows us to make this sort of a seamless process that can just happen because we know how these things need to get done. And these things are somewhat recent to be able to cross school lines and to cross district lines, but that kind of advancement even is not necessarily cutting edge, interesting, sexy technology stuff, but it's really, really important and opens the door to so much more opportunity that students can have.
Well, I think it's sexy, Carla. It's very cool. And I'm old enough to remember like how difficult it used to be. And I want to keep us moving because we are getting a little bit short on time. We covered a lot of ground in those 4 questions. And so I'm going to hand it off to you, Dan. I don't know how you're going to do it, but if you can take it away from here, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel. Um, I'd like to highlight 2 trends in education technology that we have the opportunity to guide. The first trend is the unification of research and product infrastructure. And the second trend is the ability of advanced computational methods, like what we've heard about today, to access and derive insight from a broad, holistic picture of a student's education progress. Let's talk about research infrastructure first. Educators, parents, policymakers, authors, and learners all want to understand what works in education, in which contexts, for which students. And this requires rigorous research, but traditionally, researchers have only received after the fact data sets, or if they can set up experiments, the cost and labor involved, especially for schools, meant that research was usually slow or small scale. And then the research to practice pipeline, which delivers insights back to the classroom, generally used a combination of teacher professional development, content improvements, and policy changes, all of which are very important and also take a long time to complete. But recently, we've seen a marked trend toward improving the speed, quality, and cost effectiveness of education research infrastructure. And part of that improvement is building research capacity directly into products and processes already used in education settings. So this is what we call rapid cycle evidence generation and use. Researchers, technologists, and authors can build research designs like A/B testing into the products that students use, which reduces the cost of data collection. And then analysis can often be done within that product's data infrastructure, which promotes student data privacy and security because it reduces the number of systems that hold student data. And then importantly, insights and evidence can be directly and almost immediately used within that product, even to improve the outcomes for those specific individual students who generated the data in the first place. And that is the promise of adaptive instructional and assessment systems. And it's now much easier for any EdTech product to do this. You don't have to be in a university lab or in a large corporation. You can take a look at the free and open source upgrade platform, thanks to Steve and the Carnegie Learning team, for a great example of how we can all integrate research and product infrastructure. Okay, so the second major trend is that advanced computational methods in education technology, like education data science or AI, are now much more capable of accessing and understanding data that describe many parts of a student's education in near real time. So a great example is the Infinite Campus School Dropout Early Warning System, which matches current student data against historic records of which students persisted with their cohort to an on-time graduation and which students did not. That system looked not only at academic behavior, attendance, and home and enrollment stability information, but it also is able to see the interactions between those factors and between data of a student and her peers or others in her environment and nuanced trends over time. So this is a really big area for growth in the modern generative AI era too. So at first, generative AI worked simply by prompting it. The output would directly relate to your text input and the model that it goes through. And then technologists built the ability for AI systems to understand documents. So here in education, that would be things like school policies, academic standards, lesson plan rubrics, and more. But those were often focused on the teacher's documents or maybe on the work that the student directly entered into the system for like that specific math problem. The next phase in education AI is like the Infinite Campus Early Warning System, for these AI systems to have much richer context and evidence for which AI outputs tend to work better for which students under what conditions. And we already know that context matters. Differences in education settings and individual student history and goals are extremely important for educators to know. And for the same reasons, they're important for the future of education AI. Because this will or should be done under the auspices of unified education research and product infrastructure, we as an education community can guide this sort of development to work within pedagogical and school models and within existing relationships with organizations like Infinite Campus, Curriculum Associates, Carnegie Learning, and within evidence requirements for procurement. So crucially, we can measure the learning outcomes associated with AI outputs using rigorous research designs. Thank you, Jen. Thank you to the CLIP Consortium for the invitation to speak today, and a very big congratulations on a successful project. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dan. You don't disappoint. That was a lot of information. I do want to go back to the first point that you made about rapid cycle evidence generation, bringing together lots of different kinds of education stakeholders. So, like we did with CLIP, we had the curriculum developers, the LMS, the teachers and the school districts, as well as the researchers, all coming together on the data integration side to make sure everybody had all the data that they needed. So I refer our audience to our first webinar in this series where we talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'm going to switch gears now and move over to the question and answer section. We received several questions in advance of the webinar today, so I was going to begin with those, but I encourage folks to ask any additional questions using the Q&A function, which is down kind of in the bottom right-hand corner. The first question is, and I'll maybe say it slowly and twice, because it's quite long. How can integrated data systems support differentiated instruction, especially for students who are struggling or excelling? And kind of along with that, like what are the biggest challenges when trying to integrate data from multiple platforms? Carla, I think this is your wheelhouse. If you
okay,
like looking right at you.
All right. Integration within an EdTech environment, it makes it work seamlessly, right? That's the most important part. And I think when you have things like students who are at different levels in the same class, in the same section, or in the same environment, what it can do is allow you to be connected to multiple sources of data, of content, of something that's going to challenge the kid that is excelling and help the kid that is maybe struggling a bit. And those things can happen seamlessly for the teacher from one spot, right? They can look at one thing and they can choose the items that they need to support different students in very different places. And then when the data comes through, the grading happens, and those things are already synced up to grading tasks or standards, and they go into the grade book, which has all kinds of weighted things with the assignments and all kinds of other stuff that just seamlessly comes together. And the teacher doesn't have to worry about that or think about that because it's all sort of established and set up. It's that integration part where they can talk to each other and sort of speak the same language that is very important to make that happen. So I think it's very powerful in that it can really help teachers give the students what they need when they need it. And if it doesn't matter, they don't have to be at the same place. I mean, everybody has a unique journey. And I think integrations can really help you meet the students where they are and give them the support that they need.
I'll just say, like, one of my hopes is that these kind of integrated data models can promote cross-domain collaboration as well. One of my favorite early comments when we were first testing out Mathy in the classroom was a student doing some graphing and suddenly just said, "Oh, these graphs are just like what we do in science class," right? As if like graphing in science and graphing in math are just two completely different things, right? But you could imagine an intelligent system that's really kind of storing student work in different domains. And when the student is in math class, like explicitly saying, this graph that you're creating in math, remember what you just studied in science? It's the same thing, right? And sometimes students need to have that pointed out to them, because it is not obvious to them what knowledge is sort of domain specific versus domain general, and how do you connect these kind of subjects that are often taught as their own isolated area.
I think on that, I think, and Steve, you're talking cross domain. I guess I think about maybe also students across time, to think about like students who are motivated, and to know these integrated data systems could help identify students who are likely to be excelling or to be behind in ways that might not be visible from looking at a student and without seeing the work they had done previously. I was just reminded, I was at the NCME National Council Measurement and Education Conference a few weeks ago, and one of the things that was being reported on was what they were finding in student response time in tests. And this is like a known fact there, is that students who spend less time on tests above a small threshold are generally the higher achievers. Students who know the answer the question and move on. Students who don't sit and struggle with that question. And often ways that people look at platform data are more time in the system is better because they're on task and targeted. And in the assessment context, that's really not the case. And so I think in integrated data systems, you could better understand where students are, again, based on prior performance, carefully considering that to say, hey, this student's really moving fast, but not too fast, right? To where they're actually not engaging in the assessment, but they might give them a harder question, give them a joke, give them, something else that might keep them engaged. Whereas other students, again, here might be a case where you want to send a teacher over to work one-on-one with that student.
Well, I think, John, this next question has your name all over it. So we're talking kind of more about instruction. So how can we help teachers use computer adaptive products to support struggling math students? And I think you started, going down that path.
I did, yeah. And so I'd say, one of the things that when I was earlier in my education research, there was some work done. People are familiar with Carol Twigg and the course redesign project. They did some studies on courses that were redesigned for online learning. And what they found is that students who struggled, especially students from historically marginalized communities, were, like, to the last point I made, spending more time like asking questions, rewinding lectures, slowing down, reusing material in ways that they wouldn't feel comfortable doing in a classroom. They're like, I can listen to the same thing again, and I don't feel like I'm going to have social pressure. And so I think that's something that we can do, that teachers need to do, but in very careful ways to help struggling math students so that they aren't kind of taken out of lessons, or they don't have to have pull-aside programs, where you can give students that additional support they need in ways that don't create kind of a sense of social pressure or social exclusion. Other people have fancier language for this. I don't have it offhand, but that can really help those students. And again, I do think it's back to this point of, it's both for struggling as well as for students who are students who are striving, as well as students who are excelling, to keep them engaged and to help them learn better. But I think that there's this, we have the ability within adaptive programs to do that. I think we also have a way of saying, like, let's not, smart, well-developed materials won't do this kind of, skill and drill, or keep asking students the same question that they obviously aren't getting, right? And that, I think, again, bringing back, Steve is thinking, I know in some of the work you're doing with the hint-based work, of knowing like when you should stop prodding a student and just maybe give them the answer, highlight this for something else, like, asking them to nudge. They hit a certain point where that's not productive. So I think in that way, adaptive solutions can also adapt to say, like, we need to take a different approach here, or, I think that this student really does need to, surface this issue for more human support.
Well, I wanted to move over to some of the questions that we are getting live. I'm not sure if you guys can see them, but I'm going to read the first one. And Dan, this sounds like it's for you. It says, how might Dan's second point, and maybe the first also, speak to efforts to change and improve state accountability systems especially given the recent changes at the federal level? Are there advancements that could be reported systemically similar to accountability systems? That's a big picture question here for you.
Oh, that's a very big picture question with a lot of different parts to it. So thank you for the question. Well, let's talk about the federal changes first. So as the U.S. Department of Education does less and less data collection or analysis, that does not change the need from our community for evidence-based products and practices, but it may mean that the where the research is done or how it's funded shifts. And I do believe that it will become more important for organizations like Carnegie Learning, which is providing content, which is providing a product, which is providing professional development, to have the research infrastructure to allow researchers like those at NORC at University of Chicago to do rigorous evidence using that platform. So platform-based research is going to be important. I also believe that we have the opportunity for organizations like Infinite Campus, which are doing large-scale national data collection, but they're managing it for individual local education agencies or state education agencies to think with policymakers at the state level what is needed in the individual states that the student information system can play a role in generating. And again, this is all conversations with policymakers at the local and state level. This isn't really something that an individual organization would just do on its own. But it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't have to be the federal government doing everything here. We were used to that for so long. But in the current state of our sector, it really may be that organizations like those in this room and our peer organizations take a leadership role in producing rigorous, large-scale data sets that allow state and local policymakers to make the right decisions about what's good for their communities. And I regret what happened at the federal level, but I know that the people in this room and our peers have the capacity to do rigorous work that positively affects everyone in the country.
Very, very, very nicely said. We only have, I think, like 4 minutes left, but I did want to try and squeeze in one last question. So this is from the live Q&A. It says, I appreciate the power of early warning and detection systems, but they seem to rely on completeness and accuracy of the information entered. How can we ensure that these data gaps don't produce recommendations that lead educators down the wrong path? I summarized a little bit. And Carla, this seems tailor-made for you. And thanks, Tim, for asking that question.
I think a big part of making sure things are staying as accurate as possible is to do all that you can to make sure that the data is good. There's a lot of work that we did at Infinite Campus with our early warning system to ensure that values were mapped and we had consistency across things that needed to have consistency so that we would have as accurate and complete and correct data that was possible. We also included a lot of tools that would allow the districts in the state to sort of audit that and say, there is incomplete stuff here, there is stuff that seems wrong here. So that they could go back and do some cleanup in areas where things were potentially not quite right. So there are a lot of things you can do to kind of help have guardrails on that to keep things as accurate as possible. But you're right, there is always going to be some unfortunately wrong data or misleading data that's there. We did lots of testing, and Dan maybe can actually speak to this quite a bit because he was very much involved in that. We had success rates with that accuracy that was quite high when we were testing it. And I think that went to show that the cleaning of the data that we did and sort of the different tools that we put in place really helped to make sure we were having positive results.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. I want to also say that it when we designed that system, we designed it using data that local education agencies had other incentives to have correct data for. It wasn't that they were putting data into the student information system for the purpose of early warning or recommendation. They were putting information into the student information system for many other business needs, scheduling students, making sure transcripts and enrollments happen correctly, that the attendance reporting is correct. They would have done those in any case, and they knew that they had processes and reasons for doing that with high fidelity. Because the schools were doing that already for their own reasons, we then had the opportunity to leverage high fidelity near real-time data for the purposes of recommendation. But by the way, that's something that is true across the EdTech sector of aligning incentives when you can get value from data that schools already are putting a lot of effort into maintaining the quality of. You can then use that data for other continuous improvement or recommendation purposes.
And that puts us right at time. Very, very well done, folks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our participants and our folks watching. Please reach out with any additional questions. This was I think the last in our series. So bye now.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for hosting.
Thanks.
Appreciate the conversation.
Bye, guys.